Shalom. We are here with Shoshie Nissenbaum-Goldstein. Thank you for coming on. You are a licensed Toenet Rabbanit, which you describe as a halachic advocate and mediator. Explain to our listeners what that means.
So what it is basically, it's a lawyer in the Beit Hadin, in both private Batei Din and in the Batei Din for the Rabbanut. What's different about it is that in America, anyone could call themselves a Toen Rabbanit. And they're not part of a bar association. They didn't have to study. They didn't have to stand before an ethics board. They just call themselves an advocate, halachic advocate, a Toen Rabbanit, and that's it. That's what they are. In Israel, you have to pass 6 written exams, 4 on halacha and 2 about the law, and 1 oral exam, and stand before an ethics board. And you're a part of a bar association, and you can be called to task if you violate the ethical codes. So there's a lot of supervision. It's not a free-for-all. It's a very serious thing to have a license. And there aren't too many women who have it. There aren't too many Haredi women who have it. I think I could count on my hand. And I think I am the only English-speaking Haredi woman who is a Toenet Rabbanit.
Now, do you also act as a Toenet on, let's say, a civil proceeding in the Beis Din?
In any proceeding in the Beis Din, which is limited mostly to family issues and last will and testament, inheritance things, is in the Rabbanut. Outside the Rabbanut, so I do represent in what's called Choshen Mishpat issues, monetary suits, which is most of my cases like that are neighbors suing neighbors for building, unlawful building, not letting them building, breaking things, violating codes, things like that they want to take it to Beit Hadin, or business issues, but mostly neighbors, suing neighbors. And so that anyone could represent in a private Beit Hadin. And that's part of the reason why the private Batei Din, both in Israel and in America, have so many issues and have become rather infamous because it's really a free-for-all and unsupervised.
But you will practice in those Batei Din as well?
I do, yeah. Okay.
And now, just like a preliminary question, we always, everyone's familiar with this famous mission, Avos, I think it's in Avos, the Al Tasa Atzmecha Ka'orchei Hadayanim. And it's usually meant to criticize lawyers, that lawyers are kind of frowned upon in the halachic system. Is that true? Or
so for that, there's also, it's a mitzvah, right? Lahatzil oishek meoshko, to save somebody from being taken advantage of, is a great mitzvah.
Okay.
To help somebody claim what's theirs and not be taken advantage of is a huge mitzvah. So that kind of balances it out. What a person is not supposed to be is the shark lawyer, right? Who aggressively, fraudulently tries to take advantage of the other side, right? There's something in the law called choser tom lev, which to translate it would be like...
Good faith, lack of good faith.
Lack of good faith, right? So what is lack of good faith? Is manipulating the legal system for your client, which you could do, right? There's all kinds of tricks.
Lawyers are supposed to act in good faith as well.
So lawyers are supposed to act in good faith, but all the infamous jokes about, there's a lawyer on a boat and he gets thrown into the sea.
Well, we don't need to hear that.
Right, because the sharks won't eat him because professional courtesy, right? So there's a lot of that. So, but, as a Toenet Rabbanit especially, we always have to make sure that we're trying to abide by halacha and not trying to sneak around and take advantage and abuse the system.
Is there a situation where your client has hired you as counsel to be a Toenet, and the other side doesn't have a Toen or Toenet representing them?
Yes, they'll have a lawyer sometimes. A lawyer...
But let's say they just appear by themselves. That's also okay.
In a private Beit Din or even in the Rabbanut Beit Din, a person could pass representation.
Okay.
Not advised, but they could.
Right. Okay, so can you just take us through the process? Let's say if we take a typical divorce case, take us through the process. At what time, at what point would you recommend that somebody bring you in, consult with you, and then how does the process go from there?
So it's a little bit tricky, and I'll say why. Because a lot of times people will call me and it's premature. And then, what do I mean premature? They haven't made the real decision that they want to get divorced, right? So I don't get involved in people's decision. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not a life coach. Someone comes to me and they say they want to get divorced. I respect that decision. It's not my place to question it. But if someone's not sure and they call me, I think I want to get divorced, right? And then they hear the process and the answer to the question that you just asked, it sometimes scares them off and they really actually need to get divorced. And it's complicated getting divorced because the system was created in order to prevent divorce or try to prevent divorce. As in 2014, the law was passed that all parties must try mediation first, unless under very specific circumstances. So somebody wants to get divorced, they first have to file.
Talking about Israeli law.
Israeli law. If the couple agrees, we both want to get divorced and we want to mediate, that's one thing. I do a lot of mediation, best thing to do, much better than litigation. But if one of the parties doesn't want to get divorced, or they both want to get divorced, but they don't agree on the terms, then they need to go through the court system. But you can't just show up in court and say, hi, we're filing for divorce. Even if both want to file for divorce, you have to first go through a mediation process with a social worker from the Beit Hadin or Beit Mishpat, family court, or the rabbinical court. And then you have to wait a 60-day calming period before you can file any motions. So it gets complicated like that because you really need representation before you file for what's called the Yishuv Sichsuch, trying to reconcile differences with the social worker, because you need to be prepared for that meeting. At the same time, once you hire somebody, you kind of, lishpoch shemen b'medura. You put the oil in the bonfire and heat things up.
Right.
So it's a little bit tricky. You have to be careful, and you have to realize that you're going to be living under the same roof possibly with somebody while you're filing motions against them.
Which should go on for half a year.
Half a year? I have a case now, terrible case, absolutely terrible case. Saddest story I ever had, where we are going on our 6th year of litigation. I got summoned again yesterday, and I'm like, I cannot believe it. Like, just give up already. Just stop. Move on with your life. But some people can't do that. They just have to keep...
Who you when you say that, move on, who are you referring to? Your client or the other side?
The other side.
Right.
Unfortunately, my client passed away, but he's still suing her estate.
Okay.
The ex-husband is still suing my deceased client's estate.
Through his beneficiaries.
And his children.
Okay.
Who were inherited from her.
Okay.
He's suing his own children and his ex-wife's estate, which is like, just drop it. Move on. So we've been in 6 years of litigation.
So let's just take a case. Let's say a woman calls you up. I don't know if this is typical. In my understanding, let's say as a layperson, this is what I understand the situation to be. A woman calls you up. She's distraught. She says, my husband is mistreating me. I need to get out of this relationship. Or even, let's say, Rahman al-Islam, a difficult situation, a woman where there's a violence involved, emotional violence or physical violence. A woman calls you up and she says, also, let's say from the Haredi community, she's scared. She doesn't know, what to expect. She calls you up and she tells you this. What would you say to her?
So the first thing I ask in any intake conversation is, are you safe? Mm-hmm. Most women will answer yes. And a lot of times, those are women who actually aren't safe, okay? A lot of times, someone who is not safe doesn't even realize that she's not safe. But I have to ask. That's the first thing I ask. Sometimes they'll say, I'm not sure. When someone says, I'm not sure, that's when you know they're really not safe. And there aren't great solutions. There is a miklat, there's a shelter for women, but you can't just show up at the shelter. Like in America, you have these shelters and just a woman could come with her kids, knock, knock, I'm here. I need I had to get away from my violent husband, partner, whatever, it doesn't matter. In Israel, it goes through the social services. Now, anything which goes through any government office takes time. So the other option, if the violence is acute, it's happening right now, so we have no choice but to involve the police, which I say we have no choice, not because I think it's wrong to call the police, but it comes with a price. It comes with heavy trauma to the children. Children having to see their father arrested is not a pretty sight, okay? Even if the father was abusive, right? We'd rather do it when they're in school, when they're not around. But if it's acute, usually they're around. That's just how it sometimes always happens. It's not a good thing for the children. It's not healthy for them. Sometimes if it could wait till the next day, So 8 o'clock in the morning, we could show up at the police station and file for a restraining order. And the police will almost always give the restraining order for at least 3 days, 4 days, and we'll have a hearing and explain to the judge why we need longer amount. But all those things are not simple. And it has happened to me that a client has lied to me about the amount of violence that was going on, and we actually made what's called a false report, and we got fined for it, and we deserved it. I mean, she lied. Mm-hmm. So, and he actually had a recording of her threatening that she was going to lie to the police about very specific things which she did. So she lied to me, she lied to the police, she got a 10,000 shekel fine, and I mean, of course, they ended up getting divorced, because who's going to stay married to somebody who makes a false police report against them? But that's what those are the options. The options are, if it's not acute, happening this minute, we can go to the social services, the shelter, or we can go to the police and get a restraining order.
So, if can a woman get a restraining order based just on her complaint, or oral or written complaint? Does she have to show any other evidence?
Usually for the initial restraining order, for like a 4-day restraining order, she doesn't have to show any evidence. There'll be a hearing. However, if it's a fake report, she'll get slammed for it.
Okay, but then the husband would have to prove that it was a fake report.
No, she at that point would have to prove that it was real. If she wants to extend it.
I see, if she wants to extend it. And she
Right.
prove that to a judge, you mean? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's say so now you're involved, and you've determined that that you think that you recommend, or you see the situation and you say that you don't see any other way out, that this woman should start divorce proceedings. Then what happens?
Then we file. Mm-hmm. Now, if there actually is violence and she ends up in a shelter, we don't have to wait that 60-day period.
Okay.
Okay. But barring that, we file for the reconciliation, Yishuv Sichsuch. They have it. They sit down with the social worker, and then we're frozen for 60 days. Now, during those 60 days, I'll try to reach out to the other side and say, look, like, really, really need litigation. Let's try to handle this quietly, respectfully, cheaper than hiring lawyers and ending up in court for 2 years. The average divorce in Israel comes with 2 years of litigation. That's a long time. It's a heavy emotional price, and it's financially very expensive too.
Right.
So if the couple could mediate, that's the best thing. So if we are successful in mediating, and sometimes we can mediate certain issues, and we check on we're good with the kids, we're good with the pension, but we got stuck with the house. So we can just go to court and say, okay, this is what we agree on, this is what we don't agree on, and only litigate the house, for example, or the children, or whatever, the one issue that we can't find an agreement. However, though, most of the time, as much as I try to do things with mediation, it ends up in litigation.
So would they then, if you're hired to handle the divorce proceedings, well, let's start with this question. And people, I think, have a misconception about this. Does the Beit Din handle the divorce and also the property settlement or the property division that is connected to the divorce?
It's a great question, because the answer is it depends. And it's called the Meirutz HaSamchuyot.
Okay.
You can go to Beit Mishpat, or you could do it in Beit Hadin. The question is, who files first and where? So you have to think very carefully, where do I want to file? Where am I going to benefit most from? Am I going to benefit most from Beit Mishpat, or am I going to benefit most from Beit Hadin? Today, interestingly enough, most women, and this is not like, there's a low goref. It's not, what does goref mean?
Not in all cases.
Not in all cases, right?
Yeah.
It's not absolute. But in most cases, women do better in Beit Hadin today, and men do better in Beit Mishpat.
That's a misconception.
That's the misconception.
Most people, if you woke them up at 3 o'clock in the morning,
right,
even if they're in a Dati community, they would say the opposite.
Right. They'll say, don't go to those chauvinistic rabbis.
Right.
But today you have to understand that in family court, everything is shivyon, equality. Mm-hmm. So, lady, go and work.
Meaning not necessarily equality, but egalitarian.
Absolutely, even more. But
and equitable.
You will have a woman, a mother, who has to pay the father mizonot because she earns more money than he does.
Right.
So you have, let's say, a kollel wife, right, who worked years in high tech, who has a great salary, and her husband's been learning in kollel, and they got 4 kids. and they're getting divorced. He should for sure take her to Beit Mishpat, and she should for sure make sure that she's in Beit Hadin. Because in Beit Mishpat, they'll say, okay, we have a calculator. Father earns X, mother earns X, children's needs are X, time, how much time they are by each parent, and which parent pays which parent how much. So the mother is going to end up paying the father the monthly child allowance.
Right.
In Beit Hadin, that is never going to happen.
Now, what about property division?
Property division is usually done by Chok Yachasei Mamon, which is the laws which govern of division of relations of property. Yeah. And Beit Hadin usually goes by those laws. In fact, usually in the first hearing, they will have the parties do a kinyan that we are going to divide the property according to the law of Chok Yachasei Mamon.
Meaning the parties accept upon themselves that the Beit Din will apply the civil law,
correct,
the civil Israeli law in terms of division of property.
Correct. Unless they had a prenup which says otherwise.
What if the husband says, I know that according to halacha, I would get this amount, and according to the civil law, I would get much less, so I'm not going to sign that agreement.
So if he doesn't sign it, they'll give a psak for it. I don't know too many dayanim. I haven't heard of a case like this for years and years and years. And the last time I read a case like this is from 1950-something. And even then, the Beit Hadin awarded the woman the money. They go according to the law.
Right. Dina Malchusa Dina, they apply the law of the...
Exactly. And when you got married in a country knowing that was the law.
Right.
And so, al dat ken, and with that knowledge, you got married. So that's the law. Even there's been a few cases recently, one of which I was involved in as a consultant. It was in the Beit Hadin Harabani in Yerushalayim. The woman committed adultery. Okay, so she didn't get her ketubah, but the husband said she shouldn't get 50-50 of the house either, right? Because it's her fault that we're getting divorced. So I bought the house with my money. I was the only one who had income. I bought that house with money that belonged to me before we were married, but the house was listed in both of their names. And the dayan said, sorry, it's getting split 50-50. It's listed in her name. She committed adultery. She doesn't get her ksubah, but that has nothing to do with property division.
Right.
They appealed to the higher rabbinical court, the Beit Hadin HaGadol, and they lost there also.
Okay. So when you say now, how much just in terms of we go to weddings, we hear them read the ktubah under the chuppah, but and especially in America where it's all in the amounts are in Aramaic currency. How much is a typical ketubah? How much is it worth?
Okay, so we're talking about an Ashkenazi ketubah. Because the Sephardi ketubah, they write in shkalim, right? Typical Ashkenazi ketubah, which is 100 skukim and a tosefet of 100 skukim, whatever that means, right? Talents of silver.
It's a coin from the Middle Ages.
It's a weight, right? It's a weight from the time of the Gemara. So
I thought it was a weight. Okay, I understood it was a weight of the time of the Tosfot, like the Middle Ages,
So even before, go back even before.
Okay.
So you have a lot of different opinions of what's that. What could that mean?
So what's the range?
From 6,000 shekels to $38,000.
Okay, that's quite a range.
That's a huge range because what it's supposed to be is it's supposed to be enough money that she can live for a year. So how much is that money? And how much would silver, the silver talents be worth today?
Right.
So there's all different opinions. What the Beit Hadin usually does when there's a lawsuit for a ketubah is they will take, if they're Chabad, so they'll go according to what Chabad says. If they're Chazon Ish Nakim, they'll go according to what Chazon Ish Nakim say, what the Chazon Ish said.
I mean, the Beit Din will apply from the Migzar, from the group, the societal group that they're from, because that's basically what the couple understood when they got... Okay.
Exactly.
Even though they didn't really understand it that way.
Now, Sephardim is a different story. Okay. Sephardim have actually a big problem because sometimes they write these crazy amounts, like $1 million in the ketubah, and then 2 years later they get divorced, and he comes before the court and he said, I didn't mean that. I had no idea that 2 years later I'm going to be, but you signed it and you gave it. So you want to say it wasn't real? So Harav Ovadia said not to write those kind of numbers.
Right.
One of my sons is married to a Teimaniya, and they had a rabbi who did the ketubah. He's actually Moroccan. So, and he comes to me.
So you have 3 different Eidot here.
Three different. So he comes to me at the wedding, and he's like, "Okay, how much do you want to write the ketubah?" And I'm like, we're Ashkenazim kamtsanim, like we're cheap Ashkenazim, 100 and 100. He's like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, Ashkenazim, like we're really Ashkenazim.
Right.
And I told him, do not put anything higher than that. I don't agree. And then
There's no standard form in the Rabbanut standard form?
There's a standard form, and then you fill in the amount. Just like you fill in the name of the Chatan and the Kala.
I've made 3 weddings for my children. Nobody ever asked us what to fill in.
Because you're Ashkenazim?
Yeah.
Okay, Ashkenazim have a standard thing.
Okay.
Sephardim don't.
Okay.
So he's pressuring me to put, and I said, absolutely not. We're Ashkenazim. We're doing it Ashkenazi way. We're cheap.
Now, which is the cheapest? Temani, Moroccan, or Ashkenazi?
Ashkenazim,
are
the cheapest.
And then who's the most
Moroccans.
The Moroccans. And then the Temanim are somewhere in the middle?
It depends if you're on the girl's side or the boy's side.
Okay.
So we're standing under the chuppah and he's reading the ketubah. And who listens to the reading of the ketubah, right? But I listen to the reading of the ketubah because I understand what he's saying. I
also do, actually, yeah.
Good for you. And then he reads 50,000 shekels. And I said, what? I didn't agree to that.
Right.
And my son's like, Ma, don't embarrass me.
Yeah. That's reasonable, I guess, I mean,
I hope we'll never get to it.
Right.
But
okay, good. But okay, so there's a range. You're saying it goes from I don't know, I've heard when I heard from Rabbanim in America, actually could be more than that. Could come to like $60,000, $70,000 or something like that.
I haven't heard of that high, but for Ashkenazi ketubah, but it could be that's what it is in America.
So it's a significant amount.
Could be, and it couldn't really not be worth having that litigation for it because the litigation for the ketubah is ugly.
Right. Now,
ugly.
Once you brought this up, my question is, let's say you have, do Haredi women come to you also?
Yes,
right. Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's say a woman comes to you from a very closed community, either let's say, Yerushalmi, old school Yerushalmi community, a Chazonish community, Hasidish community. Like, do they have to go to a Beit Din Rabbani, or they're like Batei Din in their own communities that have the authority to deal with this?
So interestingly enough, there are Batei Din, like the Eida Haredis.
Right.
They have a Beit Din.
Right.
They write it maybe one get a month, maybe. Which means that their people are not going to them. They're going to the Rabbanut.
Right.
Rav Nissen Karelitz, Zichrono Levracha, he has a Beit Din that does Gittin.
Right.
And they very rarely do a get.
Mm-hmm.
Most people go through the Rabbanut because the Rabbanut has jurisdiction. They have authority. There's supervision. You have these private Batei Din. They could do whatever they want.
So that may be a reason why one of the litigants would insist on going to the Rabbanut. But could there be a situation where, let's say, the husband, and I'm making up, this have it have nothing to do with reality, but I'm just kind of anticipating some preconceived notions people have. Let's say the husband, they're in, let's say, a Hasidic community, and the husband goes and he wants to file a get in the local Beis Din there, because he thinks he's going to get favorable treatment because there are these preconceived notions. Does the woman then have the right to insist on going to a different Beit Din?
She has the right to go to the Rabbanut. And Rabbanut is supreme, even according to the halacha, as long as she did not sign what's called a shtar borut. A shtar borut means, and even it's recognized according to the law, that we're going to do our litigation here. But
that she signs before the wedding?
No. She would have to sign it when she was summoned to Beit Hadin, and halachically she doesn't have to show up. But
let's say in those communities, I'm going to get to the prenuptial agreement.
They don't have regular Batei Din, private Batei Din. They're not equipped to deal with divorce. Right. Only, as far as I know, only the Eida or Rav Nissen Karelitz, and they very rarely do it.
Okay.
People, even the super kanayim, who don't vote, who don't use shekel, shkalim, right? They go to the Rabbanut.
Okay. Right. So you're saying both the husband and the wife would want to go to the Rabbanut?
Most often, yes.
Okay.
I did have several cases where the husband didn't want to go to the Eida Haredis, and we would just refuse to go. And we filed in the Rabbanut, and he had to come to the Rabbanut.
Okay.
And if he doesn't come to the Rabbanut...
the husband didn't want to go to the Rabbanut?
Right. He wanted Eida Haredis.
Right, okay.
Okay, and we're not going. No way we're going to the Eida Haredis.
Now, how do you get exposure to these communities so that these women or men in some situations know about you?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I guess you help one person, one client,
Word of mouth.
word of mouth, all word of mouth.
Okay, so you have exposure in the different communities, also Dati Leumi communities.
Yep.
Okay, and so now let's go back to the.
I have non-religious clients also.
Right, because that's another good point, and we should talk about that here in Israel. Whether you're religious or not religious or secular, you are required to go to the Beit Din for divorce.
Correct.
Even if you have no connection to Jewish practice.
Correct.
Okay, so you're and they also know about you. In other words, you are. Are there any? Is there a Toenet Rabbanit that's not, or Toenet Rabbani that's not that's, let's say, secular? Do they have people like that?
I don't know any of them.
Mm-hmm.
I was learning with a woman when I was studying who wasn't religious, and she dropped out of the class pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You have to be really, really learned to pass these tests.
Right. You have to know. You have to learn. You have to spend a lot of time learning halacha.
You have to have a background. You have to learn the Gemaras. You have to learn the Shulchan Aruch. You have to learn the Nosei Kelim.
Right.
You have to know the lingo. You know, it's
right. So
I'm
before
not sure.
you, where would a Haredi woman go to feel comfortable or to have representation in the Beit Din?
To a man.
Oh, you're saying there are Haredi To'en Rabbani.
There are many of them, yeah.
I see, okay.
And one of one of the ways I became a To'enet Rabbanit was a Rav who I consult with a lot. He's a Dayan.
Mm-hmm.
And he came back from Beit Din one day and he was so upset. He's like, there is something going on between that woman and her representative. And he saw it again and again and again. And he came home one day just like so upset about it. He called me and his wife, you know, and he's like, both of you, I want you to go learn to be Toanot. And she went and she asked the Shaila and to Rav Fisher, Rav Fisher's son. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah.
That's very Haredi.
Yeah.
He said, it's a good thing to do, but you should know it might ruin your midot. And she didn't like that answer. She's like, I'm not doing it. I was like, I don't have time. I don't know. How could I study? I mean, again, to go back to school, not doing that. And then a few years later, I was summoned to a Beit Din, a private Beit Din, by a former employer of mine who was suing me for infringing Hasagas Gevul.
Right.
Which is a case which you never sue for someone for that because you never win. But
infringing on intellectual property or
intellectual property,
okay.
right? And I countersued them that actually it was my property, right?
Okay.
So they sued me for a lot of money, and I walked away from that with 50,000 shekels.
Okay.
And at the end, the Dayan called me over and he said, "You should really be a Toanet Rabbanit." And because I represented myself in that case, they also represented themselves. It wasn't like we had Toanim. And then, like, the idea kind of was in my head, and then I got divorced. And I'm like, I could really do this. I just paid this guy a fortune of money. I could have done this. And then I went and started studying.
So what's the process? How many years are we talking about? What's the curriculum?
It took me 4 years because I had a lot of stuff going on and I couldn't take consecutive classes. But there's 2 tests in Choshen Mishpat. Not in every siman in Choshen Mishpat, but certain simanim.
Right.
With all the Nosei Kelim.
Right.
And 2 tests in Eben HaEzer.
Right.
From the Shulchan Aruch. And then there's 2 tests on the law. One on the procedures of the court and one in general of a general secular law. Because we have to, because the Beit HaDin uses secular law.
Right.
They're really a hybrid of halacha and secular law.
Right.
And then an oral exam.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry to jump around here, but these things are actually coming up and are now actually piquing my interest. Tell me about your background. Where did you come from? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Chicago.
Okay.
I grew up in a very, very, very strong Bnei Akiva home. Extremely idealistic. My parents are really like public servants.
You went to Ida Crown?
No, I went to Hannah Sachs.
Okay. What is Hannah Sachs?
That's Beis Yaakov High School. Okay. But I went to Hillel Torah. So I was a horrible student. I mean, I think if any of my teachers know that I actually scored the highest on an Eben HaEzer test, I think they would not believe it, right? I scored higher than all the men in one of the tests. Highest grade in the class, 97, which means I got like one tiny 3 points off. That's,
right.
It's a good score.
It's a written exam or?
Written exam.
Okay.
Then there is an oral exam, but there's written exams. I don't think they would believe me. Like I would have to show them my test.
Right. Okay. Go back to your old teacher.
A horrible student, really bad student. But my parents were very, very idealistic, very dedicated, very involved in like a million stuck organizations and the school board. And so I went to Hillel Torah, which is like a regular mamlachti dati type of school.
High school.
Elementary school.
Okay.
And then I wanted to go to Beis Yaakov for high school. And my parents let me. Not sure.
So you grew up in, let's say, a modern Orthodox home, religious Zionist home.
Right. But a very, very strong, like Shabbos, it was all Divrei Torah. Like you dare not come to the table without a Divrei Torah. And very ideological.
So, and you chose to leave your elementary school and go to Beis Yaakov.
Right.
Okay. And then what happened? Then where did you go from there when you graduated?
Came to Israel did the year in Israel. And then I got
seminary.
Seminary.
Which seminary?
Seminar Yerushalayim.
Okay.
Tiny little seminary in Beit Vagan.
Okay.
And then I went back to America and I got a teaching job in Cincinnati. And I started teaching. And I was dorm counselor there. And it was an amazing experience. And then I was teaching.
Okay.
For all the years. Made Aliyah, also taught here.
You got married here?
I got married in America.
Okay.
And I had 3 kids in America. And then made Aliyah on the first Nefesh B'Nefesh flight.
Okay.
2002. And lived in Beit Shemesh for many years. I got divorced, like I mentioned. I got remarried, and my husband dragged me to Tzfat. And for him, it's worth it.
You live in Tzfat now?
I live in Tzfat now, yeah.
Oh, so you got married again. Okay, and now what were you in the Litvish community and Hasidish community?
Community.
Which Hasidut?
So my first husband was Breslov, and my second husband is Nadvorna.
Okay, that's an obscure Hasidut. Maybe only in Tzfat. I'm not so big on it, but
exactly.
It's not one of the big ones.
Medium size. It's not Bells. It's not Ger. Right. It's not big one.
So now you live in Tzfat, and you live in a Nadvorna community in Tzfat.
No, there's not Nadvorna community in Tzfat. So that's the beauty of Tzfat. It's just everybody's there.
Right. And your children are all from your first marriage?
Yes.
And they were brought up in your house?
Yeah.
Okay. And your husband had children as well?
He does, yes.
Okay. So you, and then you were teaching a seminary here in Israel or just in Cincinnati?
Seminaries here, and the biggest seminary is Rav Wolf, the Seminar Chadash in Yerushalayim, the Yashan in Yerushalayim.
Okay. Which one is called the Snif?
The Snif, that's the one I never taught there.
Oh, okay. My daughter-in-law studied in the Snif.
Oh, okay. So I never taught her.
I understood that the Snif is considered like the flagship, the flagship Beis Yaakov. Yeah.
There's 3 of them. There's the Yashan, the Chadash, and the Snif.
Okay.
I've taught in the Yashan and the Chadash.
Okay.
But I never taught in the Snif. I taught in the Hasidi in Yerushalayim. I taught in different seminaries in Beit Shemesh.
Right. Now, did you get any pushback from the community or from your Rabbanim or from Askanim in your community about becoming a Toenet?
So the answer is I don't know because I never really asked and I don't really care. I'm sure there are, I'll put it like this. Askanim are like not the kind of people that I like to deal with, so they're probably upset about it. But I don't know.
But there were never any like pashkevilim put up about you or people.
No.
You're able to basically, be active in your community, be a woman part of the community, and no one, says anything to you or no.
They think I'm a lawyer, so like they call me up and they're like, "Oh, could you help me with this?"
So they don't really know what you do.
They don't understand. They like they when they need me, they call me for all kinds of funny things. I'm like, I don't do that. I just this one girl called me up. She needed some kind of help with some kind of technical thing with her citizenship. And I'm like, I don't do that. She's like, well, aren't you a lawyer? I'm like, no, I'm a Toenet Rabbanit. She's like, you can't help me? And I'm like, look, I could help you get divorced if you want. But first you need to get married.
Right.
And she's like, oh, okay. And people think I could help them with like guardianship for elderly people. And I can't do that. I'm like, I could fill out the forms for you, but you can fill them out yourself. And you need a lawyer for that. They're like, really? You can't help me? I'm like, no, I can't.
Now, do people come to you before the wedding and ask you about a prenuptial agreement?
Unfortunately, very few people. And that is something that if I had influence I would push people and really push people, including young couples, to do a prenup.
Why?
Because a prenup can't solve the problem of an aguna.
Let's just talk about the different types of prenup, because everyone, I would say most people think of a prenuptial agreement as an agreement to force the husband to give the get when he's refusing to do so.
Right.
Now, but there are all types of prenuptial agreements. There's a prenuptial agreement that deals with division of property, and there are all kinds of prenuptial agreements that deal with the giving of a get. So tell us a little bit about the prenuptial agreements.
So a prenuptial agreement, let's start from where you started first. In terms of solving the aguna problem, it doesn't solve the aguna problem because most men who are going to be long-time get refusers, they don't care what you do to them. They don't care if they're paying a fine. They don't care if they sit in jail. There's something literally psychologically wrong with them, okay? It's like there's nothing you can do about it, okay? But for somebody who's not that over the top and knows that for every day that when the woman files for divorce, every day that they don't grant the divorce, they're going to have to pay a fine of $1,000 a day, which is halakhically completely acceptable. That might be helpful for somebody who's not that psychotic,
right.
Somebody who's just like a little bit on the line, and also it could protect the man. I don't think people realize that most cases of sarvanim are actually sarvanot, are women who refuse to accept a get.
That's most cases, you're saying?
60% of cases which get stuck in the system because one side is refusing to go along with the get process is because the woman is refusing.
Okay, now let me just jump in here because, most people grow up, they understand, they have some kind of a peripheral understanding that a man can divorce a woman against her will, but a woman can't divorce a man against his will. Now, tell us why that's not true.
It's not true because since Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom, right? So we know Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom is not, a man could not just give a woman a get. Not only that, he cannot give a woman a get against her will. She has to accept it willingly. So Rabbeinu Gershom kind of evened the playing field almost completely. Not 100%. There's a few little caveats because there's heter mei rabbanim.
Right. We'll get to that.
But the playing field is pretty even. So my husband, for example, in his first marriage, his wife would not accept a get for 5 years. Rav Lau recently, for the first time in the history of the state, put a woman refuser in jail. It took 48 hours, and then she accepted her. She was willing to accept her get.
Okay.
It's the first time ever that a woman was put in jail. I tell this to my clients at the intake, 2 women I won't represent, or men, right? Anyone who's a get refuser on any side, and anyone who tries any parental alienation. That's my kavadom, right? I won't represent those people.
I mean, using the children as a weapon to get what they want in the get proceedings.
Or just as in hurting the other spouse, or just because they think they're doing the biggest mitzvah in the world by shielding the children from the other evil parent.
So 60% now, I don't know, you never practiced in America, but is that true in America as well?
I don't know if it's true in America. My guess is that it's not, because I think in America, women are just very, very scared of never, ever getting their get.
Right.
Which is something here which is less scary because the authorities, the Beit HaDin has a lot of authority, right? They could put a man in jail. It happens, right? I had a hearing last week where the dayan said to the husband, he's like, in Israel, we have something called Beit Kela, right? Were you ever in a Beit Kela? And he's like, no. He's like, well, if you don't give her a get, that's where you're going to be. And he was like, but why? No. And he's like, we have Beit Kela here. Just letting you know, we have jail here.
But that's not, I mean, will the Beit Din do that as a first response to?
No, you can't do that as a first response.
I mean, we hear about, your driver's license taken away. You can't leave the country. You can't
leave the country. We do automatically right away. Driver's license, can't write checks, can't use credit cards, can't work in certain, in government offices. Jail is the last resort. Okay, jail only comes when there's a psak for kfiyah laget. Kfiyah laget means you have to give her, according to the halacha, a get, you must. But there's very rarely on the other side a kfiyah laget to a woman that she has to accept a get.
Right.
So many women will use this. You want to get divorced. You want to move on. You already have a girlfriend or whatever it is, right? So I want money. I want compensation.
The woman will say that in order to agree to accept the get.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're going to give me what I want. I want 60% of the assets. Or I want something that's not
Now,
Magieli.
can the Beis Din make a psak that the woman, that, in other words, let's say the Beis Din is convinced that there should be a divorce. Then there's a psak that there should be a divorce. The woman, let's say, doesn't agree to accept the divorce. Does that consider that she is refusing to comply with the psak of the Beis Din?
Correct. If it's there's different levels. There's mamlitz, we recommend divorce.
Right.
Mitzvah legarsha, it's a
Right.
mitzvah to get divorced.
Right.
And then there's kfiyah,
Right.
right? So when there's kfiyah, for example, let's say the woman committed adultery, right? That's kfiyah, and we proved it. That's kfiyah laget, no question. And if she doesn't receive her get, if she says, no, I'm not accepting the get, she runs away, she hides, she doesn't show up,
Right.
or she says, I'm not coming, or I'm not, they could put sanctions on her, but it was only done for the first time recently.
Now, if the husband committed adultery, will the Beit Din then also make the same psak?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. What are the circumstances there? What would they look at? When would they make the psak like that? When wouldn't they?
It's very dependent on the dayan and his hashkafa.
Okay.
There are some dayanim which to get from them a psak of kfiyah laget is like impossible, right? And there are some dayanim who give it very quickly. There are some dayanim who will go according to Rabbeinu, the teacher of the Ben Ish Chai, Harav Chaim Palaji,
Okay.
who has a very, very clear statement that a couple which has been separated for 12 months and there's no chance of shalom bayit, they must divorce. It's kfiyah laget, right? So you have dayanim who, if a couple is separated for 12 months, they'll automatically give a kfiyah laget.
But isn't there a concept? There's a concept in halacha of a forced get, a get meuseh, right?
Right.
So how does that play here? If the Beit Din forces the guy to divorce, then can that be considered not a valid divorce?
Well, what does forcing mean, right? So there's different ways of forcing.
Right,
You're talking about like beating somebody up.
But that we understood is actually not so. That's less of forcing than to bind them contractually or something like that. I mean, give us some clarity on that whole.
So it's actually very complicated.
Okay.
But think about it like this. Whenever he has a choice to end the marriage, then he could end the marriage. So Beit Din could say, for every day that you don't give a get, you're going to pay $1,000 fine, for example. Okay, so that's not called kfiyah laget because he could pay the fine. He could pay the fine, choose to pay the fine or give the get.
Right.
His choice. Your choice, sir.
Right.
You can go to jail. Well, you don't have to stay in jail. No one's forcing you to stay in jail. Give the get.
Right.
Right? So that's not considered kfiyah laget. And in some instances where there's mamish like a halacha that he must divorce her, they could use physical violence, which we don't use today because no matter what everybody says.
Even so, at any time he could stop the physical violence by agreeing to give the get.
Right. But the question is that it's there's a concept in halacha like you tie somebody to a tree and you say, sell me this, right? Zabinin, you know, and is it a kinyan, right? Is it real? Is that considered when you beat somebody up? So we don't want to do it because it's a very serious thing, eshet ish.
Right.
So that's like an absolute last resort, only under certain circumstances. It has to be done exactly, as prescribed in the Shulchan Aruch.
Right.
We don't do that in Israel.
So when you say that the depending on the dayanim or the Beit Din that you go to, if the man committed adultery, you'll have a different result. When you're brought in as a to'enet, can you do what we call forum shopping? And because you know that, so you will advise, don't go to this Beit Din, go to that Beit Din.
You can't really choose which Beit Din you go to, right? In other words, you can choose between Beit Mishpat and Beit Hadin for certain things, but certain things are only going to be in Beit Hadin, and you don't have a choice. You go, you fill out the forms, you have to go to the Beit Hadin according to your jurisdiction.
I see.
And let's say in Yerushalayim, there's basically 5 herkevim.
Right.
Okay? They just randomly assign you a herkev.
Right.
So
if a woman comes to you and she says, I know my husband committed adultery, right? And you know that in that Azor, the Dayanim are less prone to force him to give the get. What will you do?
I'll dig up other reasons. We have a whole Shulchan Aruch with lots of different reasons where we have kfiyah laget.
Oh, I see.
So if you want kfiyah laget, you got to come with a lot of reasons. You got to come strong. Again, once the dayanim, most dayanim, once they see that there is zero chance of shalom bayis, and when I mean zero, right? Then they already start, come on, let's just end this. And very rarely do you have somebody who is so stubborn and stupid, I don't know any other word to say it, that thinks that after you've had like 3 or 4 court sessions, really shalom bayis?
Right.
Like you're sitting here and bringing all this dirt against each other.
Right.
Really, you're going to get back together?
Right. Right. So, so you basically you'll then find some other reason why that particular Beit Din would have to force the. Now, let's just talk about, when a woman comes to you, you have I'm sure you have rates. You charge. I don't know if you charge by that. Most lawyers charge by the hour. If they're a plaintiff's lawyer, they may work on contingency. That's not usually the case in marital court. Are you cheaper than a lawyer? Say cheaper, less expensive than a lawyer? Are your rates comparable to a lawyer's rates in this situation?
Listen, even lawyers' rates, there are a lot of family lawyers out there. A lot, right? There are a lot of toanim out there.
Right.
Not a lot of toanot, but a lot of toanim. So my rate is somewhere, I think, in the middle. And
middle meaning both amongst lawyers and toanim.
Yeah,
right.
Somewhere in the middle. Like I'm not cheap.
Right.
But I'm not, I don't start at 100,000 shekels a
right.
teak.
But what we're seeing is that it's super important in terms of how you're going to be able to handle the whole procedure to have someone like you representing them.
I have a case now against a top lawyer in Tel Aviv. She's representing the man, I'm representing the woman. She's a top lawyer. She's very, very famous. So I was really curious. She actually has her own podcast. I listened to her podcast. Very interesting woman, fascinating, brilliant. But she's secular, and she does not know halacha. And she's getting up and quoting, Harav Ovadia, and I'm trying not to burst out laughing because she has no idea what she's talking about. She could have won the case. If I was her, I could have gotten my client much more than what she did because I know halacha, right? She doesn't know halacha. She doesn't know how to talk to the dayanim. Even like tiny little nuances. She calls them adoni instead of kvodo.
Right.
It's a tiny thing, but it's when you go to Beit Hadin, you want somebody who speaks the language, who can talk to the dayanim in their language, who can throw in psukim to explain things, who when the dayanim say a pasuk, they understand what the dayan means. I think it's very important that everybody have a toin or a lawyer who's halachic and knows halacha. They don't have to necessarily have a license of a toin, but when you're in Beit Hadin, you want someone who knows halacha,
right?
Not only the law.
And do you find in general that the dayanim are respectful of you?
Super respectful. I was surprised. Pleasantly surprised. And even I represented in a private Beit Hadin, and the dayanim were Teimanim. Now, my daughter-in-law, like I said, she's a Teimaniya. She grew up in Teiman. She came here as 11 years old. Her and her sisters didn't even know how to read. Her mother did not know how to read. So I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to go in front of these Teimani rabbis. They're not going to like...
Didn't they know how to read Hebrew either? Or just
they didn't know how to read, period.
Teimani women aren't taught to read.
And she wasn't. I don't know in general, but they didn't know how to read, and her mother still doesn't know how to read.
Okay.
Her mother's my age, same age, doesn't know how to read. Hebrew, at least. And I thought for sure, oh my goodness, they are not going to be happy with me. They were so respectful. And at one point, I quoted this very obscure k'tzos, and they're like, one of the dayanim said, there's no k'tzos that says like that. I said, well, let's open it up. And he opened it up. He was like, wow. And I said, good. And they were like, they were extremely respectful, extremely respectful.
Right. Now, how would you assess the as an overview of the Batei Din in America, in Israel, in terms of divorce proceedings? What kind of grade would you give the Batei Din in general on, let's say, sensitivity? Let's really talk about sensitivity.
That's a hard question.
That's the question that people mostly ask.
That's a hard question because you have so many different herkevim, so many different dayanim. So you have some who are extremely insensitive. Absolutely. And you have some who are extremely sensitive. I was in a hearing, I think it was 2 years ago in Yerushalayim. And some of the Israeli families, when they get divorced, so the whole chamula comes, right? The parents, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, the brothers, the sisters. And there were these elderly women there. And a dayan had been walking through the hall. And they didn't know he's a dayan. And they said to him, like, where can we get a cup of tea? Now, you can't get a cup of tea. The Bezdin doesn't serve tea. He went into the worker's kitchen, made all the old ladies their tea, served them as if he's, like
a
waiter, and gave them a good word, and then went on his way, right? So you have amazing dayanim like that.
You won't find judges like that.
I think in court, they have really separate chambers. You'll never see them walking through the hall. In Bezdin, you will see dayanim who come into the hall and, walk around there. They need to get something, and they're not going to go through all the back mazes of they'll use our elevators, commoners' elevators and stuff like that.
Right. All right, so let me just close up. I'll ask you this one question. We definitely have to schedule a